You're joining us to this episode just before Thanksgiving. We have the honor to host today Joshua Lowcock. Joshua is the Global Chief Media Officer at Universal McCann. Good morning, Joshua.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to meet again and have you kind of on our episode. We're excited to have you, and really today we want to talk a little bit about hashed emails and identities and how that's kind of impacting the future of privacy and where that fits in. And as context for our conversation, just a few weeks ago, I had a discussion with a key marketing leader in one of the CPG brands. And we asked them about their plan of how they're addressing the cookieless world. They said, you know what, we're really focusing on basically collecting email information, targeting emails, and really focusing the user identity around emails. I was a little bit surprised because I know that there's multiple mixed feedback on that approach, and really I wanted to kind of get your take. Maybe just before we dive into that question, just to explain to our audiences, give me your perspective on deterministic versus probabilistic data. How do you see that from your angle?
Okay, so lots of questions there to unpack. Let's start with the deterministic probabilistic one. I mean, deterministic data is always great, and if you can go down the deterministic path, that's brilliant. And it's created, in one sense, a negative connotation around probabilistic data. To the email question, I think what we're going to see is a resurgence of interest in probabilistic data, because I'm personally not convinced that email is a sustainable solution alternative to cookies.
And why is that the case, though? Why? What's the changes that are happening? If authentication has been around for a while, what's your kind of take or your trend, or how do you see this moving forward?
I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind. I have, personal opinions based on the way the technology roadmaps are moving. So you look at what Apple did with email relay, you look at what Firefox is doing with email relay, and there's a number of commercial services you can go out there and buy, like non-ADDI and others. So it's not just limited to an operating system or a device. You can go out if you're particularly motivated and use it. But there's also comments from regulators as well. The California regulators made it quite clear that they see email identification and email tracking as more persistent and invasive than cookies. And so you go, based on both technology moves and regulator statements, email just can't survive.
Yeah, it seems that on one hand, like email is tied with a lot of personal information that can still be extracted online, which gives more, I'd say, put more risk for whether it's a data leakage or really having users less in control of what data is shared. Another problem that we're hearing at times is even for companies that choose to go down the deterministic path with emails, there's a lack of coverage, and it's really information that is difficult to get at scale and with high quality. That's interesting. Where do you think sort of big tech players play into this? What's Google or Apple's or anyone else's approach towards email and authentication?
I think, so let's go through each of them in turn. So Apple's clearly, its email relay service is clearly a sign that it's against using email as an identifier, and the login with Apple move is clearly a way of separating things out. Google has been slow to move in the space, and I say slow to move because I absolutely categorically think they will move in the area. There's all the reasons that they should, especially when you think about it broadly in a strategic positioning perspective. You can say, every data breach that happens involves exposure of email addresses. It opens people to scams. Google operates Gmail as a platform. It'd be quite foreseeable for Google to announce, we're going to make all Gmail addresses have the ability to be anonymized. They're relayed. When you're logging with a Google account, your real Google address will never be shared. And therefore, you as a user will never be subject to the risks of a data breach because your real email won't be revealed. You can just turn off this temporary relay one. So my personal bet is that, within the next 12 to 18 months, Google will move down the anonymous relay path. And so when you open the conversation this morning about the CPG partner collecting email addresses, I understand why they're doing it, because there's a lot of people that believe email is the future. So they're doing what they think is a reasonable course of action. But the reality is that in 12 to 18 months, that will be taken away from them, and everyone will have to pivot again. So why not pivot now?
Yeah, it seems that there's a turmoil and really a lot of change that is occurring in the industry. And so, you speak and you're probably interacting with key leadership of all these brands and marketers. What's your recommendation to them when they think about their strategy moving forward? How should they kind of think about the transition from emails to something else? What is that?
I mean, it involves a hard and serious conversation with clients on, do they have a legitimate reason to collect first-party data? So the big challenge about the death of third-party cookies is everybody thinks they need first-party data. But the reality is every consumer and customer and human being doesn't want a relationship and a first-party data relationship with everyone else. So that becomes the first meaningful conversation. And then the second one is, who should you be partnering with that can actually offer a solution to you? Is there someone, and it depends on the client and the client mix and category. So if you're a CPG brand, partnering with retailers sort of makes a lot more sense, because retailers do have a legitimate reason to collect data, because e-commerce transactions, people have to provide an email address, but not just an email address, but other first-party data points that are a lot more reliable and persistent. So a home address, you're not going to lie about your home address or have a disposable one because you want to receive your products. So you need multiple data points for it to work. If you're not a CPG and you're not in a category that has a legitimate reason to collect first-party data, then looking at more probabilistic ways of understanding users, looking at contextual methods and other insights you can get from users to activate your media. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people have this, propensity to see that as a bad outcome. It's not a bad outcome. I think it's a reasonable, strong, mature outcome, especially in a privacy-first world.
Do you see really the insertion of technology or maybe advancements in AI and machine learning to help create some of that data in a more anonymous or scalable way?
Oh, absolutely. I think AI, machine learning, deep learning, they all play a key role in solving for the future. What we've got to get rid of is, and I'll get back, there's prejudices around contextual, because contextual was early days of the internet, and contextual led to people being in, I'll say unsafe, but unsafe is the wrong word, like uncomfortable environments where they were targeting messages based on what people were reading, but wasn't necessarily what they were interested in or relevant to your brand. So AI and machine learning can make, contextual advertising much more reasonable, personable, and valuable, and absolutely relevant.
Right. And I think probably kind of aligned with those lines, there's a good chunk of education that is required with this transition, right? From what we used to have maybe in that older version, pre-privacy changes, and where that world is heading. It seems that with the use of technology, there's probably a lot of things that we can close the gaps with, but still with, being privacy preserving and really putting the users first, and letting them control that data. Yeah, that's great. I mean, those are kind of very interesting thoughts. Anything else that you see kind of on that trends of the privacy and changes on targeting, maybe from marketer standpoint?
I mean, before we get on to the privacy thing, I just want to go back to that comment you made about the education piece, which is historically contextual is always about page level contextual. Right. And that's where AI machine learning can be much more valuable in providing relevance, because you can actually go total session and total site contextual. So you go, okay, a person came into a page, they read the automotive review of the latest car, but then they read about, ways to save money when you earn less than, $100 a day. And you go, okay, well, based on those insights, they're not a luxury car intender, they're aspirational, they're much more budgetary constrained than I'd given them credit for. I won't serve a luxury ad at them. And so that's one of the things we need to educate people on, is this total view of contextual, not individual siloed page views. I think on the privacy regulation thing, to sort of answer that question, I think we've got to pay much more closer attention to what regulators are saying and what consumers are saying. Marketers pride themselves on listening to consumer behavior and sort of meeting that demand, but they're sort of tone deaf when it comes to hearing what consumers are saying about privacy and data protection. And so I'll push back again. Like, data collection seems like a great thing to do, and first-party data seems like a great thing to do, but consumers are getting more risk averse to that. I always like to point out I'm Australian. My accent sort of reveals that. Australia's had, numerous data breaches in the past, month, again and again and again. And regulators are now intervening and pushing very harsh laws on data breaches, and penalties up there with GDPR-like penalties, fines for companies that are involved in data breaches. So it's not only a case of, do you want to collect first-party data and can you do it in a privacy-compliant way? Are you organizationally, prepared to wear the burden of risk should that data be breached and you're subject to data breach regulations? And so I think a lot of brands neglect to think about that or just forget entirely.
Yeah, and we are seeing regulators really doubling down and taking action there. We've seen the Sephora case, and just recently with Google around the location tracking. It really seems that there's, I guess, strong action from all types of parties into that right direction. But there's still a lot of changes that are occurring. I mean, it's a transition. I don't think we've seen all the changes, both from big tech and from the regulators. But I think you're right about we have to sort of keep in mind, like, where is this heading? What are the consumers thinking about this, and what are the regulations that are changing in light of this trend? Yeah, I mean, that's great, Joshua. I think this is very helpful for our audiences. It's been great to have you on our Coffee with Kahoona series, and thank you very much.
No, it's great being here. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you very much.